Glad you joined me, man. So you're a street apologist, and so you deal face to face with a lot of people, but it seems like one of the big things you do out on the streets is you've come face to face with a lot of guys who call themselves Black Israelites or Black Hebrew Israelites, or they're like an ethnic group that believes that they belong to the Hebrew people. And before we get started, because I want to pass this off to you, a lot of people on my show that watch are skeptics, even myself, but I'm a friend of people. Like, it doesn't matter to me what your faith is. I'm very friendly. I'm interested in hearing what you have to bring to the table on this view, as there's an interesting view that's not identical in any way to this view, but there's a study on the importance of the seed of Abraham that I'm actually currently investigating right now. So a friend of mine said that he was at work and he's a Jew, and he saw this guy's name on the desk, and it had like something Israel or something. He says, "Oh, you're a Jew." And he goes, "Don't call me a Jew." He said, "Bleep the Jews." He said, "I'm a Hebrew." And I was like, whoa, this is some serious language to say. So tell us what you're presenting today when it comes to these people. Like, what do they believe? What is the point? Can you fill us in?
Well, Hebrew Israelism is a network of ideas, beliefs, and practices. And so people will talk about the Hebrew Israelites. I prefer to use the terminology Hebrew Israelism. And there is a precedent for that in religious studies. And so specifically, Anglo-Israelism, which came prior by about a century, originally was called British Israelism, but as it branched out and people in the Americas accepted it, they kind of got included in sort of as a stepchild of Europe, was the way it was looked at, became Anglo-Israelism, and it was in multiple Protestant denominations in the United States, sort of just, you had people here and there, a lot of mainline, a lot of even so-called fundamentalists in that time. But that kind of died down. But you had these interesting little groups like the Worldwide Church of God that continued it on. And then the Christian Identity folks kind of picked it up. So it became a lot of its modern versions are a lot more openly racist. Anglo-Israelism was certainly ethnocentric, but it was no Christian identity. But Christian identity is openly a racist system of biblical interpretation and worldview. With all that being said, Hebrew Israelism, sometimes called Black Israelism by scholars like Jacob Dorman, is sort of the flip side of the coin. And it says at the least, descendants of slaves in America are the true Israelites. It also says this: God exists and he cares really bad who your father is, meaning it matters in his sight in the way that you have standing with him, the ethnicity, really it's perceived ethnicity of your father. Also, modern day Jews are religious and ethnic imposters, and that's why your friend had those kind words for our friends with the hats. And then you also have maybe something else I would add to it, that Hebrew Israelism always brings with it a tendency to have a strong emphasis on what they will call law keeping. Those are kind of the main components of the belief system. So it can have at its core Black Americans, but depending on the Hebrew Israelites faction they're involved with, can branch out. It can branch back to Africa and then sweeping up the Igbo people, for example. They largely dwell in Nigeria. Or it can go over to other oppressed peoples in the United States and include on the 12 tribes, Native Americans and Hispanics. So there's a variety of ways in which it can be expressed, but those things are held in common by all of them. And it's also recognized at this point, last thing I'll say, by scholars who look at this, it's no longer appropriate or precise to strictly refer to practitioners as engaging in Black Judaism or Black Jews. Certainly, there is a legitimate study of Black Judaism, but when we talk about Hebrew Israelism or Black Israelism, it is not identical with Black Judaism. And so that's important for people to understand. And so here we are in 2020, and the thing is growing growing.
I bet, especially in light of what we're seeing right now. It seems like, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not educated in this area whatsoever. This is, in fact, why I brought you on to the show. Is this a reaction to white supremacy to some extent? Like you said, the British Israelitism, is that all reactionary? The Hebrew Black Roots movement, stuff like that, a reaction to? Or do you think they're really like trying to somehow connect themselves into the biblical narrative, and they think there's literally a biological lineage connection, or soteriology, so to speak, or salvation here that's mandated by the seed, if you will, and therefore it's important who your father is?
Yeah, well, I mean, Hebrew Israelites focus on the seed. In fact, that's why a lot of them deny the Christian doctrine of the virgin conception, because since you've got to have your father's DNA, is the way they look at it, it can't be the case that if they accept Jesus as a Messiah, which I would say a large part of them do, but to those that do, most of them reject the virgin conception because they've got to have Joseph's DNA. Mary's DNA wouldn't be good enough. And in essence, I mean, this is a short version of why they'll say they hold a Luke and then say, the virgin conception is a mistake, or sometimes they'll say Luke was wrong. They have, different ways. But it's like this, Anglo-Israelism was put forward by privileged people. And so they use the beginning of Deuteronomy 28 as an interpretive template to say, look at the way Yahweh said that Israel would prosper in this covenant reminder that includes here as part of sort of the vassal structure of Deuteronomy. Right here, you get these blessings if Israel's faithful to the covenant. And so the Brits would say things like, look, this says we're going to be the lenders. And the Brits are like, hey, we got the banking system. It says you're going to be all over. Hey, the sun never sets on our empire. So it was funny, now people are like, oh, well, the growth of Hebrew Israelism is Donald Trump's fault. I mean, I'm not saying you're saying that, but you kind of get people who kind of say that. Certainly, current factors exacerbate certain things. In fact, that's part of my thesis of how it generally grows whenever it does grow. But there's been, I would say, at least 4 growth spurts to the thing. So within that paradigm, there's a human need to know who I am, where I'm from, where I'm going, and you want to be connected to a bigger story. And what better way to do that, especially if you're a lot of times pushed down by society, to say, hey, society, this thing that you say you hold near and dear, guess what? It's really all about us anyway. And you've been mistreating us, and now you're going to get punished for it. And so you have this attraction to that. And so it's just like everybody wants to be, Hebrew until there's a Holocaust. That's kind of the way I look at it. And then all of a sudden, and then it's not as popular, right, to identify with Israel in that way. But right now, that's what the Hebrew Israelites are doing. And a lot of them have a disparaging view of being of African descent. And so a lot of them do not view themselves as African. They view themselves as a Semitic. And for some reason, they like to say the word Shemitic, a Shemitic people who were dwelling in the land of Africa as part of the diaspora, and then were taken out during the transatlantic slave trade. And so actually, they would say African Hamites, a lot of them would say this, sold them out to other nations. And that was part of their punishment for not keeping the law. And so their message is twofold, and it relates to both things I've said here. Number one, so our people need to come back to keep the law. So we stop getting these punishments, the latter part of Deuteronomy 28. And also the nations that did this to us, they're going to get punished because you've mistreated God's people. And so it's a whole narrative. And then as long as you hold on to that, all these little side doctrines are not really that important to them, although they're constantly tinkering with them.
I want to say thanks to Digital Hammurabi, guys. Make sure you guys go check out his YouTube channel. Great guy. Him and his wife, they have their own channel where they actually teach Hebrew, and they know Assyrian, or I'm probably butchering this here. Josh can correct me later, but they know ancient Akkadian, I believe, something like that. These guys are like on a whole nother level with this scholarship. And by the way, I forgot. Make sure you guys go and subscribe to Vocab Malone's YouTube channel. He's debated these guys, okay? And look, I actually was tempted to have some come on the show. And I said to myself, man, do I want to get beat up on a whole show for being somebody who's probably Caucasian? I don't know. I mean, I'm probably judging before I even have something like that happen. But people have told me, they're like, dude, you probably don't want to have that on your show unless they're civil. And a lot of times they're very aggressive to have on the show, because I'd rather be educated and learn what people think and what they believe. So I got it, Josh said. I got it, guys. I got it. Akkadian. So I'm on the money. So, okay. Let's talk a little bit about this, because a lot of scholars interpret particular things in the context in which they belong. It seems like they're lifting a lot of these, if you will, Hebrew scripture passages and applying them, like you just mentioned Ham, and applying them during the slave trade. Like they almost spiritualize or fulfill these in a cyclical manner from the Old Testament, Hebrew scripture, so to speak, into their own contemporary or somewhat contemporary slave trade situation. Am I wrong in stating that like they're kind of applying the narrative and again in their own situation here?
Right. So what I tell Hebrew Israelite interpreters, what we had this discussion, is a lot of these judgments that you're saying are happening right now. These judgments happened in the pages of scripture itself. And so I use this term a lot. I say you don't need a leapfrog forward to the transatlantic slave trade to find an instance of when you have Israel committing cannibalism, for example. You know, that's predicted in the latter part of Deuteronomy 28. And that's just a way. It's like even if you don't believe the Bible is a divine book, which certainly I defend that it is, people can understand that during siege warfare, part of what would happen is cannibalism. That's the context in which that would be understood, and that does happen in the pages of Scripture. Well, that is predicted. It's going to happen in Deuteronomy 28. Now, was that a major part of the transatlantic slave trade? So what's happened is, as Hebrew Israelites have interacted with Christian apologists, they have changed some of the ways they have interpreted Deuteronomy 28. And notice I've brought up Deuteronomy 28 again and again and again. The more clever Hebrew Israelite apologists now are saying we don't need Deuteronomy 28. But the average Hebrew Israelite, that's sort of their John 3:16, especially verse 68. And so what they do is they used to basically say Deuteronomy 28 is fulfilled in the transatlantic slave trade. It's sort of a clumsy one-on-one. They've since tweaked it, and they'll have some things happening sometimes. And you did catch on that it can be considered cyclical. They'll say, well, the curses are perpetual. And so what they'll do is they'll say not all the curses have to happen all the times. Because if I bring this up to them, for example, Deuteronomy 28 says that the king whom you set over you is going to be taken away. He's going to be carted off as well. I'm paraphrasing, but all you got to do is read Deuteronomy 28. You see what I'm talking about. I'll say, who's the king? You know, how can there be a king over all these West African tribal ethnicities? Because there's not going to be one, first of all. And who are these kings? Every now and then they'll name some random person who they believe is of royal lineage, who they think who got caught up in the transatlantic slave trade. But a lot of times they'll actually say, well, not all the curses have to happen every time. Now, this is some new lines of responses they've been giving, because they didn't really have to answer any questions until really the past, I would say, 3 to 4 years, because by and large, they were on public access TV in the tri-state area in New York. They were doing a lot of street teaching, and they're arguing with construction workers and homeless people, to be frank with you. And they're really not having to deal with anybody who knows anything what they believe. Most people did not understand the essence of what a lot of their claims were. And they were running around in New York for years saying, no one will challenge us. Bring down the best scholars. It was this kind of thing, right? And so now that it's changed, they are tweaking some of the arguments. I think it's ultimately results in a less cohesive model. Not that their model is really all that cohesive. And it's interesting to see what they've been doing with it. So yes, they do that with the scripture. And what's fascinating is if you bring that to them, they're like, well, look, Isaiah 29 tells us that you got to interpret the Bible line upon line, precept upon precept. So you're trying to read the Bible like a storybook, like a novel in this chronological order. That's not what you're supposed to do. You take one line and then you stack a precept to understand the next verse. And so that's why when you bring a verse to them, you're like, they all of a sudden go to another verse. You're like, wait, what are they doing? In their mind, they're following their interpretive grid. But what they're really doing is finding something that their interpretation is a clear contradiction of what you just read, to offset that to then interpret this to basically say, well, it can't mean what you just said because this precept over here that is a clear, and they're usually wrong in what they're saying about the first verse, but they go to what they view as sort of a winner, right? They go over there, then they jump back. I always say this is Hebrew hopscotch. So if you watch some of my videos, what I do sometimes is, and the street videos, we'll edit them a little bit. So I'm on the street and they'll do this. We show Mario from Super Mario Brothers, and it'll be on one brick, and it'll say like 1 Corinthians 15, and then it'll go, and then he'll go over to the 2 Kings, right? Because he's jumping over, he's playing Hebrew hopscotch, even though he's Italian like me, paisan. But nonetheless, you see this going on, and to them, if you call them on that's where this is the Hail Mary. This is the Hail Mary. Well, this book wasn't really given for you to interpret anyway. It's a spiritual book, and you're a carnal man. And so, you don't have any business teaching me anyway. That's where you get. And I'll be honest, that's the mean ones, so-called. And to be honest, the nice ones, too. They always kind of end up going there eventually.
They feel that way, at least, even if they're not as aggressive or confrontational about it. And I like what you said. I like your term, Hebrew hopscotch, because another scholar I talked to calls it gerrymandering. And it's making something, like if you take your perception on what you anchor as clear and then run to another passage or something, and you go, well, that's clear. So because this is clear, this passage fits what I'm already saying. You can't argue because they bounce around between different areas to try and prove their point. And so I call that harmonizing, but maybe over harmonizing in a lot of sense. But anyway, I like the Hebrew hopscotch. That's pretty funny.
One thing on that. Now, there will be a difference between someone who would describe himself, in essence, like myself, as a believer versus an unbeliever. Because if you go to, say, a place of higher learning, a seminary that you study biblical text at a graduate level, the assumption at sort of a mainstream place is when they'll use the phrase unity and diversity within the Old and New Testament. And the emphasis in most mainstream settings is the diversity, and indeed what they view in essence as the internal contradictions of the Bible. Bart Ehrman did this in his book, God's Problem. He in essence says the Bible tries to deal with the problem of evil. It gives different answers in different places, and all of them fail. That's sort of an example of that. Whereas, so the Hebrew Israelites and I were on the same page in one sense, that yes, I do think you can interpret scripture in light of scripture, because I do believe it's a continuous narrative, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a different thing to leave your context entirely on a regular basis to try to find something you're more comfortable with to offset clear things. And this is what happens. But that's a fascinating discussion about biblical interpretation in general. But this is how the Hebrew Israelites operate. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. I actually agree with that statement. Even though I'm a skeptic, I actually agree with this statement that there are places I think are necessary to consider and look at on harmonizing. I'm also careful about that because there are different authors and maybe they have different recontextualization concepts being utilized. But that's like going into more biblical interpretation and why I would look at something and maybe interpret that a little different than maybe what the original context in the Hebrew scripture says in the New Testament. It might have a different contemporary usage, if that makes sense, in light of the first century. But yeah, I'm with you 100%. Like, I'm not like no book and no verse never connects with another one either. But I do notice what you're talking about. They jump and they go, well, this passage clearly says what I'm trying to say to make their point about the passage that they originally were arguing with. And they keep doing that a lot. I could only imagine what you go through in the streets, because these guys look aggressive, man.
Yeah, you gotta sort of have a certain what I like to call constitution, and I'm not gonna claim that I grew up in Harlem, but I did grow up in the city and had a certain upbringing that I think by God's grace properly prepared me for a lot of this. And so, when you're out like on the asphalt and you're playing basketball in certain settings, for example, you just got to be willing to take a lot of things on the chin and deal with a lot of things, and people are going to try to rattle you and read you and all this stuff. And you just gotta, there's no one to call. You can't cry to anybody. And you gotta understand this. Similar to when, maybe you could tell by, I don't know if I have unorthodox style for a Christian apologist or something. I don't even know, but that's because my background is sort of underground hip hop culture. And, I would jump on the bus, go up North High Street in Columbus and go to these insane battles. And then, be like 50 dudes in a room that should only fit 25 people. And you're backed up against some record because it's a record store, and everyone's grabbing the mic. And, being in that environment, you just have to like kind of understand, okay, this is kind of how it is. And so some people, they thrive or, they don't like it. And it's similar to with the Hebrew Israelites. Not all the time, but a lot of times after I deal with a certain guy for a while, we have a decent resolution somewhere in the conversation where there could be some kind of mutual respect. But some of them also truly hate me and tell me what they want to do to me and my family on a regular basis. And, unless you think that it's, and I don't say that to be a martyr, it is what it is. Unless you believe what you're doing is important there and that it matters, I don't really know why most normal people really put up with it. And I'm not trying to be funny. I'll tell you, Derek, I dealt with atheists in the street, though, because when the new wave of what's sometimes called neo-atheism, the new atheist came, where all these people, and I saw it firsthand because I was dealing with folks at Arizona State, kind of got excited about the big silver book, the God delusion, and came out and wanted to engage in a very hearty way against the Christian evangelist out there on the street and stuff like that. I was right there in the thick of it, dealing with things, and I became friends with a number of those atheists, though. In fact, close friends with a number of them over time. And I that was a good lesson learned. Same thing with a lot of Roman Catholics I dealt with, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, more so really with atheists than anybody else, as far as being able to have longer term healthy relationships and still have honest disagreements. With the Hebrew Israelites, it is much more difficult because they feel like you're attacking the very core of who they are. So you must be a hateful racist, basically. So it's
an identity thing.
Yes,
right.
It's much more difficult for them. I'm the same guy. I was friends with, my buddy Omar, who was a hardcore atheist, my buddy Sean. We could be, I'm the same guy as I was then. But the Hebrew Israelites, I try and as I might, it's a different set of circumstances. And to be honest, even Muslims. Now, the reason I say that is because when I dealt with Muslims, I tried to focus specifically on Salafi Muslims. And those are the ones that generally people will call hardcore, radicalized, stuff like that. But they would call themselves Salafi. And even those guys, because of various factors, could be friendly, come over to the house, et cetera, and have very profitable discussions. So I'm like, it's a kind of a funny day when the Salafi Muslim is a sort of a gentleman compared to the Hebrew Israelite. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want a nice Hebrew Israelite for the show, I could give you some names or recommend some guys who could come on here and be chill, right? But at the same time, there is a reality that, and I don't know if they realize it, but either way, it is what it is.
Let me ask you this. If you could take us through a few examples, like of some of the arguments that you hear that are unique to them, that you trying to defend the Bible from the apologist standpoint that you take, disagree with them on and argue with them a lot, like that you hear all the time. I know you say Deuteronomy 28, but is there a place in which you personally disagree in terms of the ethnicity soteriological approach? So the idea that if you're not a descendant, do they hold to the idea if you're not a descendant, you technically have no salvation? Or are they that exclusive? Or do they think you're just secondary? You're like kind of like a servant type of person in the kingdom of God or whatnot? How do they view that?
Yeah, the answer is both. And meaning the one Westers. So these are folks whose ideas descend out of a school that was in Harlem at 1 West 125th Street. One West is not a group or a faction. It's sort of like if I say a Christian who is reformed, that's not a denomination. That it's a certain set of theology that a variety of denominational folks would hold to. Similar if I say one West or one Westism or one Wester. So it's a certain perspective within the larger framework of Hebrew Israelism. Almost all of those kinds of folks hold that what is in future for the other nations is slavery. and they have levels of it. Some of them emphasize what they call hardcore slavery and bondage and all that. Some of them even advocate the idea of sex slaves, and people will sometimes focus on Hebrew Israelites because they tend to talk about white folks who a lot of them call Edomites. But one Westers believe that there's all kinds of people who have no hope of salvation. The Japanese, who they call Ammonites, the Chinese, who they call Moabites, Arabs, who they call Ishmaelites, Africans, who they call Hamites, Indians, who they call Elamites. We can keep on going on the list. White folks, who they call Edomites. And so all these groups, their only hope is bondage, slavery. And what their eschatology can tell us, these one Westers, is that during the 1,000 years, the Edomites are going to get the brunt of the retribution of slavery. And at the end of that 1,000 years, they're going to be literally annihilated, like Thanos snap. They're gone. But the other nations, after that 1,000 years, what happens is they have sort of a weaker status of servitude from that point forward. So basically, we got rid of the worst nation out of them all. But, everyone else gets to stay around. They're still our servant and slave. We're not going to treat them as bad as we did those Edomites during that 1,000 year, something like that. And of course, modern day Jews are considered Edomites, usually considered Amalekites, which is considered sort of like the chief worst of all type of Edomite you could be. This is within the one West scheme of things. Again, I remind everybody. And so they're going to be gone too. They're going to kind of get the worst of the worst, And so you'll see images out there where they'll have guys with furry hats bowing down to the Hebrew Israelites and stuff like that, And so this is what they do. And that's the one West spectrum. The non-one Westers, the non-campers, they will generally say, look, as long as you don't violate the protocol, you can be grafted in. We can call you brother and sister as long as you recognize your place. Meaning, you can't teach us the Bible. For example, you can only teach your own people. They have some, and the relationship will be one of just sort of proper order. It's a willingness that you submit, and it's a friendly relationship. And that's what it'll be for all eternity. And so it's not a hardcore slavery. It's sort of a different kind of thing that they would recognize. So you still have a demi status, but they would still call you brother. These other ones. But see, salvation for them is very carnal, very material. Meaning the way the world is right now, Hebrew Israelites view the return of Jesus, who they call Yahushua if they're a one Wester. They view it basically as just flipping the current world circumstances. So those on top are on bottom, vice versa. And you continue on there, and things happen like the one Westers believe they're going to get superpowers. So they'll make claims out on the street like the X-Men movies are about us because the Jews know we're going to be granted our powers. I kid you not. Just look up Black Hebrews like X-Men, and you actually find videos of these guys saying it. And so with that, you have a situation where well, let me stop there. I'll stop there. But yeah, go ahead.
No, this is fun. I'm actually, I think it's funny, but I mean, it's real. You know what I mean? Like, I personally obviously think this is kind of funny, but I think it's kind of sad to take things out of context, of course, and apply them like this in such a way. Look at how much division that would cause. Can you imagine someone being, I hate to use the term, but brainwashed into something like that, deconstructing from that kind of thought? It's got to be hard. Have you ever witnessed anyone on the street actually deconvert or watch them deconvert? Have you seen that happen? And I'm sure it's rare because it's such a deep-seated situation. But do they turn around and become vocal against the movement they were once in? I mean, have you witnessed that?
Well, on the street, that's like the dramatic story of a Mormon elder ripping off his name tag in your living room and throwing it across, and saying, I'm no longer a part. I've never witnessed like on the street, but during conversations on the internet or on the phone, yes. And what happens is, generally speaking, most of the people who come out that we've been dealing with, they usually are so scarred that they turn against all what they perceive as religion, especially if they're one of these more controlling type groups. They view it as all just control and stuff like that. Or they get out and they still have a lot of the bad doctrine in their system. So they can't shake the idea that if you go to church on Sunday, for example, you're in essence just worshiping the devil or something like that. And so they'll still be Sabbatarians and be like, yo, I'm not of this Hebrew Israelite thing, but you Christians, man, you need to start observing the Sabbath. And so they have these strong, what are sometimes called Judaizing tendencies that remain wholly intact. It's rare to get a Hebrew Israelite who comes out and then is able to land in a healthy place and be helpful in the combat against the bad ideas of Hebrew Israelism. Because a lot of times they're so scarred in some way or another, they're extremely angry, whatever it is, that it's very difficult for them to really be, for lack of a better word, useful, because sometimes they do more damage than good. But there are those rare folks who are able to do it by God's grace. We got Brother George and all the folks he's with, for example, in New Zealand. Well, he's in Australia, but he's a New Zealander. And folks like him, that it's really great to see. Jordan Ortiz, who just wrote a commentary in the book of Galatians, and he was raised in this thing. And so you do have some real stellar examples, and it's great to see. And then there's the people who come out and they're okay, but they either have a family member or somebody still in it, so they're not going to say anything publicly against this, or they're simply afraid. And I don't always mean they're afraid of getting killed, but they don't want to deal with the repercussions. I'll give you a very real example. The ICGJC, Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, whose leader, before he was taken out by COVID-19, claimed to be the manifestation of the Holy Spirit bodily. The ICGJC, they have you do a confession when you're first entered into the school, but they secretly record these confessions. And what happens is if you try to leave, they weaponize the confession against you. And so people that leave the ICGJC, for example, have been historically very hesitant to speak out against the ICGJC even after they leave, because they'll have all kinds of things about them. And even if they don't actually sort of share the actual video, what they'll do is, hey, well, we do this. And this person, when they first came into the school, admitted to us that they had sex with a dog. And by the way, I'm not kidding. That's a real example. Wow. And so they'll do things like that to just utterly destroy you in any ugly way they can. And that's what happens with a lot of these groups.
I saw, and I'm sure probably plenty of people who are watching this have seen the recent, what is her name? The Church of Scientology. She came out big time on it, and she was talking about how you use stuff against them. Yeah, that show is actually pretty intense, but this sounds extremely cultic on that level. Yeah, someone else agreed. So I still can't get over the way that they're using these texts. But then again, I haven't really read British Israelitism, if you will, or Christian identity material a lot. I've briefly looked into it, and I said, you're the first person I came across and said, I got to get this guy on. I mean, you spoke eloquently, you understood the position, and it doesn't sound like you're trying to strawman them at all. I'm interested in hearing some of the disagreements that you've come across. Personally, let me ask you this, so our audience is aware of your position. What do you believe? Are you just a pretty much a fundamental Christian? Do you hold to a Reform type background? Are you Arminian to some extent? What is your background? If you don't mind me asking, now, if this is a $1 million question, someone can donate $1 million, but I'm just asking.
I'm a Calvinist, presuppositionalist, Reformed, cautious continuationist, historic pre-mill, person who believes in evangelism and at the same time an intellectual pursuit of these things, which is why I care about apologetics. And I don't know whatever the position I could name, but I haven't figured out every one or whatever. But I mean, I care about trying to have these things right. And so those are my positions, which are a lot of, to be honest, a lot of those are unpopular positions, even among Christians. But it is what it is. So that's my perspective right now. But what it's some of this is an attitude for me. What I mean by that is I have what I think anyway is intellectual curiosity. So I don't, do these things for trivia's sake. However, nonetheless, they still are fascinating and interesting and intriguing and engaging to me nonetheless, right? And I think these kinds of beliefs play a lot more important role in our lives than a lot of times we recognize. For example, when you read just media reports, a lot of times these big worldview issues are right there, just bubbling beneath the surface. And a lot of times reporters just, I don't think, to be honest, are trained to see how much of the things that they report and cover on a regular basis end up relating to larger worldview issues, whether it's cremation or robots taking care of old people in Japan and all kinds of other stuff. Seriously, no joke. It all relates to some kind of worldview issue at the end of the day, because these ideas have consequences. So I recognize that, see that, and also I believe we can go hard and be real. We don't have to do sort of the stereotypical interfaith dialogue, which is, no one's really right. And so we can all get together and sing songs and chant, because at the end of the day, who really knows? We're just blind men touching the elephant and fleas on a dog arguing about the dog. This kind of stuff. Well, I don't think that's true. I hold the objective truth. But at the same time, I don't understand why that needs to turn to animus and especially violence and all that kind of thing. I do not understand that. Don't share that. And so I can have friends that have all kinds of views. As long as they can stomach me, I can stomach them. And in fact, maybe even be friends. And so that's the view on that, even though those are my positions.
I only asked because, and I actually shared a lot of those positions I had in common when I was still actively in the faith, and I respect it. I totally understand where you're coming from, and with that perspective, because I never came in contact with this type of movement. How do you combat their position with your position, if you don't mind? Like, in what way are you trying to, I guess, kind of give us a walkthrough on some of the topics that come up and how you combat them, if you don't mind?
Well, the identity claim, the ethnic identity claim in and of itself is only sort of mildly problematic. Meaning, if someone says, "Hey, I'm an Israelite," okay, more power to you. But it doesn't end there, really. It never does. Kind of like when someone becomes a flat earther, all of a sudden they believe in 1,000 other, and every time I say stuff like this, someone gets upset, but it's the internet, whatever. This is my view on it. If someone who's a flat earther, all of a sudden they embrace a multitude of conspiracy theories and end up look like Mel Gibson's character in that movie Conspiracy Theory. Well, who happened to be right about one, I guess. So anyways, you have the situation with Hebrew Israelism where this identity claim acts as this kind of this doctrinal anchor, or this sinks down everything else, or perhaps you could even say a magnet that attracts all kinds of other bad ideas. So the next thing you know, you're embracing alternative history, which is really a revisionist history, and all kinds of other things that end up at the end of the day, you end up saying, well, this person, because of who their father is going to be my slave forever. Or I need to divorce my wife because she is Filipino, and Filipinos are not Israelites, and we can't marry non-Israelites. So,
wow. Ezra mentality. Like they use Ezra and Nehemiah, I suspect, into this, right?
Yeah, but they don't use Ruth and Boaz, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, in a manner of speaking. So you look at that, and it's a serious thing. So for me, the most important thing is, who is God? What is the gospel? And on those things, they're usually fundamentally wrong. So, this is to the skeptics watching. They think this is, I understand, angels dancing on the head of a pin. But to a believer, it's not, because you're dealing with the nature of God here, and He's revealed Himself who He is, and we accept it. And so, they're almost to a man, to a woman, not Trinitarian. And so that affects all kinds of things in their soteriology and a number of other things. So the who is God question, trying to have them speak on the deity of Christ, you understand when they say He's divine, they really end up meaning something different than Christians have historically meant for thousands of years. And they almost view it as not a big idea, a big question. They view it as like a smokescreen to really discuss the real issue of who's Israel. And similar with what is the gospel. when you get to the gospel, if they hold to Jesus as Messiah, they'll say, well, yeah, we're saved, or he did this or that on the cross, but then we've got to do this and that. And so the classic doctrines, which I think are biblically derived, of salvation by grace through faith alone, those really all get destroyed. And even when you have a Hebrew Israelite who says they hold to that, they end up meaning something different than, again, historically has been meant by these. And so they're not the first group to do this. You know, I'm in Arizona, lots of LDS folks, but Mormons do this. They'll use grace language, but they do not mean what the reformers and then, of course, I'm going to go back what Paul, for example, meant, meaning their understanding of grace is radically outside the pale of orthodoxy, yet there's using these classical theological terms, filling them with different meaning. Hebrew Israelites sometimes do a similar thing. And so they view it as like, why are you nitpicking me when we need to be discussing who's Israel and what about the fake Jews in our land? You know, this is like all it's about. So every time we try to set up a more official debate with these guys, who are the people of the book? I mean, what they mean by that is who are the Israelites and who can have salvation? It's almost like it's very difficult to get a different debate topic with them. So I've turned down a whole bunch of debates because I'm like, no, we need to debate this, and there's just a lot of them aren't for it. Every now and then you get a good, interesting debate. And it's because of the sort of singular focus on those issues. So my idea is God's grace is liberating and freeing versus the shackles of extra tradition and for humans to think that they can, in essence, enact perfection. The gospel of God that we see enacted on the cross, that's the display of God's justice and mercy at the same time in a beautiful way. That is utterly freeing, and there's a freedom in Christ that you can't find anywhere else. So I don't want Hebrew Israelites to die or to go to jail or to get fined or to not have freedom of speech. I want them to come to the light of Christ. And then when they do, they realize that their ethnocentric claims need to fall down. And that's what Paul said in Philippians 3:9. I count the fact that I was a Hebrew of Hebrew. I count that now as skubalon, Greek, poo-poo, in a manner of speaking. That's what Paul said, and that's what we want to see these folks say. I thought I was a Hebrew, but and maybe they'll hold on to that whack doctrine, whatever. But nonetheless, I count it as skubalon now, because I realize that's not what's important, right? And then they can turn to the end of the book and be glad along with me when I see the throne room scenes in Revelation 5 and Revelation 7, in which it says every nation, tribe, and tongue, and not try to interpret that as, well, that means all the tribes of Israel or something like that.
Is it how they interpret it?
Some of them do. A lot of the one Westers, this is the tribes. Just means every tribe of Israel.
So they'll say the 144,000 are also the every nation, tribe, tongue, kindred as the same people. Okay.
This becomes very fascinating when you talk to a one Wester, because if you here's a way to know a one Wester, even if they don't call themselves a one Wester, they have a sign and it'll say 12 tribes of Israel, and then on the left side, it depends which way you're looking, but on the left side it'll have a modern day ethnic group, and on the right side it'll have on the left side, it has a biblical tribe name. On the right side, it has a modern day ethnic group or geographical boundary. So on the left side, Asher. On the right side, Colombia to Uruguay. On the left side, Gad. On the right side, Native Americans. My point by saying that is they interpret the 144,000 as literally 12,000 Native Americans, 12,000 people of Aztec descent, 12,000 people of Inca descent, 12,000 Mayans, people of Mayan descent, 12,000 Dominicans, 12,000 Puerto Ricans, 12,000 Cubans, 12,000 Black Americans. And here's the most wild one of all when it comes to this 12 tribe chart that the one Westers use. It's a one West distinctive, just like the tulip, for example, which Calvin is distinct to Reformed theology, right? In its essence, right? They have, and I'm looking at my chart. That's why I'm looking up. I have a chart on the wall right here. Reuben, they say is the Seminole Indians, which is kind of strange because remember I said Gad are the Native Americans. They've isolated out as part of their tradition. Reuben is the Seminoles, right? Away from Gad and the Native Americans. So I always ask them, do you have 12,000 Seminoles yet? You know, that it's a crazy thing. You got out of all these groups, 12,000 Dominicans, okay, 12,000 Seminoles. I mean, I also not say, have you even met one Seminole in your religion? Because we know there's a lot of black folks. In fact, according to one study, over 1.5 million people in America identify as Hebrew Israelites, 4% of the black population, according to a recent study by Lifeway Research and the Philos Project. And you can find those findings online and look at it and see how they did it and all that stuff. But this came out last year. Well, they're going to be able to fill the Judah requirement, right? But good luck with so it's just pointing out the silliness of it. And they get this whole chart from their bad interpretation of Genesis 49. Issachar, the Mexicans, because it says the Issachar is treated like a beast of burden, and then lays down in a place where there's a land that has good rest. Well, Mexicans are unpaid workers here in the United States, and then they have a siesta, so they have a rest. And so this is Issachar. And stuff like this is how they'll have the interpretations of Genesis 49 being any individual modern day ethnic group. So yes, that is how they do when it comes to the one Westers. Now, what will happen is, Derek, if you get a Hebrew Israelite on, because it'll probably be a more calm one, I'd recommend, they'll be like, Vocab, he's not really careful with his information and data, and he's like making it sound like we're all this one thing, and he like tries to take the worst and then say, but notice how many times I've said this is one Westers, this is one, try to differentiate it and sort it out. He makes it seem that's a minority of it. They do this every time. I've never met a Hebrew Israelite who's like, hey, I appreciate you trying to be careful and distinct, because by and large we do, right? It's funny, though, because Hebrew Israelites, most of them don't even know until they ran into me what a Calvinist was. They didn't even understand what a Calvinist was. They thought, a large percentage of Hebrew Israelites, when they first ran into me and the guys I rolled with, they thought apologist was, first of all, apologetics, meaning they thought you call it a person who's an apologetic. And they thought it was a distinct Christian denomination. And we had to explain them for about a year. It's called an apologist. An apologist does apologetics, and it's not a denomination. It's a field or a discipline within Christianity. And what that lets you know is, first of all, they had never, when they were in the church, which a lot of them were, they never knew that. It lets you know they never dealt with apologetics, and maybe that's why they're Hebrew Israelites.
These guys are blending. They're blending Judaism and Christianity in a way. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're obviously blending. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I get where they could try to capitalize on particular passages where this happens, but what really caught my eye, Vocab, was the ethnicity aspect of it. Don't get me wrong. We know that they're going to be Judaizers. They probably are strict circumcising and the whole nine of Torah, etc. I don't know how extreme, but I suspect they seem like they're Torah observant in some way.
I always joke and I say, hey, before each Passover, do you pull everyone's pants down? Meaning, there's dudes, because we've asked them this before, there's dudes who go to their Passover feast who are not circumcised. Yeah. And also, where's the Passover supposed to take place? According to really the law, it's in the land. The Passover is a pilgrimage festival. That's why Jesus, when he was 12 years old, got caught up in the throng, or so they thought, because it's a pilgrim. That's why they traveled. You didn't have every festival in the Old Testament was not a pilgrimage festival. Some had to happen in Jerusalem, though. So they say they keep Passover. They don't keep Passover. They keep the festival of booths. Go outside for 7 days in a tent. I'll be like, hey, so you were out there 7 days? If they're honest, because some of them are just dishonest. They're like, well, I could only go 1 day. I had to go out. You're not really keeping the law then. It says 7 days. If you're going to keep it, you got to keep it. Well, the Most High knows, to the best of your ability. Where's that phrase in the Bible? Where's it say to the best of your ability? This is the kind of meaning they claim that they're doing this, Derek. They're not law keepers. They're not really keeping the law the way you're supposed to. You know what the camps, the one Westers do on their Saturday, their Sabbath, their day of rest? They go out in the street in the middle of 100-degree weather here in Phoenix. They take their signs, they put on their garments and their fringes and their boots, and they set up their PA, and they curse and yell at all the white people that go by and try to compel all the people that think are Israelites to join their religion. That's their day of rest. I always joke and say, we keep the law. Christians don't keep the law. You're lawless. You think you can do anything. They claim that we're all antinomians.
Right.
And I'm like, so you're keeping the Sabbath right now? I don't think anybody in the Old Testament would have looked at what you're doing and said, look at these Sabbath law keepers who drove in a car or took a bus to get here, pulled out a sign. It's a bizarre thing. Really what they mean when they say they keep the law is we don't go to church on Sunday and we don't eat pig. That's what they really mean. Now, They won't like again, they're going to say Vocab's a liar. That's not true. He's a false witness. This shows he's a devil. But I'm telling you the reality on the ground. And this is not a personal slight. What it shows is just what was said in Acts 15. And really just what was said. Let's go to Galatians 2. Paul confronts Peter and says, why are you trying to put this law on the Gentiles, which neither we nor our forefathers were able to keep? It's just
what do they say to that? Do they hate Paul? I mean, do they discredit Paul, or do they say you don't understand him? What do they say to you?
Excellent observation to ask that kind of question, because so first of all these Christians love to run to Paul. I remember one time when I was quoting Romans 3, or I wanted to get to Romans 3, because Romans 3 is a potpourri. I always mess up that word, but potpourri of the beginning part is a potpourri of Old Testament passages. So what I did is I read the Old Testament passage from Isaiah directly instead of when Paul's quoting it. And I was like, well, right here, this says this, and it was a relationship to sort of the universal nature of sin. And he's like, well, what are you quoting Paul in the New Testament? I was like, this is Isaiah. You thought it was Pauline because that's where you see the quote, but I'm quoting Isaiah. Anyways, so sometimes I have an adverse, like, knee-jerk reaction to Paul. Yes. And so what do they do with Paul? They a lot of times will go to where Peter says there are things in his letters that are hard to understand, and though ignorant and wicked and unstable, twist them to their own destruction. And so they're like, that's you. So they'll read that as their precept before they discuss Paul. That's one thing that they do. So it's a way to kind of offset. They're kind of saying that's what you're doing right now. Or they'll say, well, if they hold that Gentiles can be saved, they'll say, Paul's an apostle of the Gentile. I'm an Israelite. So therefore, what he's saying is for you guys. It's not for us. So they say, you can't put Paul on me, basically, because I'm an Israelite. You're a Gentile. That's your guys' guy. Or some will say he is a rabbi giving his rabbinical opinion on these matters. And just like, Talmud or something, we don't really have to look at it that way. Or some will just say he's just not scripture. He doesn't belong in the canon.
So I've heard this. Do any of them say that the Gentiles of Paul are actually Israelites, lost Israelites?
Yeah. And so what I do is when they bring that out, Derek, I'll say, okay, tell me your interpretive mechanism by which you're able to go to a scripture, and when it says Gentile, how you're able to know it's actually an Israelite in a Gentile state of mind. And they never give a clear answer, but I already know the answer. And here's the answer. If the text is saying something positive about Gentile,
salvation or something, right?
Yes, something good in any way. Look at the pretty smile of that Gentile. I'm just kidding. That's not a Bible verse, but anything positive anyway, that's actually an Israelite in a Gentile state of mind. But if it's negative, that's those stinky Gentiles. That's literally how it goes. Now, again, this is more the One West interpretation. One Westers deny even what is really probably the most obvious example of Gentile inclusion into the New Covenant, Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. And I always like him because I think he was an Italian. He was an Italian band, kind of like Frankie Valli was, right? He's an Italian band. Bad joke. Some people don't get it. So check this out. They'll even say Cornelius was actually an Israelite, even though all clear signs are obviously he's not. The non-One Westers, they stand against that interpretation. They say, no, look, Cornelius is clearly a God-fearing Gentile who is able to be grafted into the larger people. But notice, he's still being taught there by Peter. He's being taught by an Israelite. And, he's sort of taking this submissive stance towards Peter and the Israelites. That's how Gentiles need to be. He actually is a Gentile. So there's debates amongst them. But the guys on the street, almost to a camp, are Cornelius was an Israelite. That's almost like a litmus test. If you're dealing with a Hebrew Israelite who thinks Cornelius is an Israelite, you're dealing with someone who's been influenced by One Westism. Now, if you say, oh, you're a One Wester, well, I don't know what that is. A lot of them don't even know what they're talking about. And frankly, to be frank with you, it's because a lot of these guys, especially these new guys, get involved after they watch 2 hours worth of YouTube videos. It's what we call conversion by algorithm. A lot of these guys don't even know much about their own history. You know what I'm saying? So when you talk about the sort of history behind it, they're like, I don't know. But that's the reality of it. You can kind of tell by their view on Cornelius which way they're really rolling.
That's a big one. So let me give you a comment here by a gentleman, Robert Rowland, says, Mythvision podcast, why not invite him to your show? Rabbi Akwidi Ama is on YouTube. Vocab Malone should talk with him as well. It appears that we have some, I think, Black Hebrew Israelites in the comment section.
We do.
That
That's all the names I recognize. We do.
Okay, I don't know these names. I've seen quite a few comments. A lot of these guys are friendly to the show, but I was careful in bringing them on because I saw your interaction and how you were really, really cool with Michael Heiser. You know, Dr. Heiser. I do want to get him on too because I think he has some interesting interpretations as well when it comes to Hebrew scriptures and stuff, dealing with the gods and the sons of God, and a lot of interesting things there. Another person says Paul wasn't real, neither Christ. You should have had a balanced show. I think he feels that the show wasn't being balanced by having you on, and I get it. I mean, if you're a believer in these things, I can understand why you feel this isn't a balanced show, because this is not a show having a Hebrew Israelite present their view, but someone who's been debating them for some time. And so I invited you on.
Yeah, the way it works is anytime you speak on Hebrew Israelites in public, you always get this. And so just you'll be ready to get a whole bunch of, Vocab's lying on us, da-da-da-da. But again, you'll see we try to be pretty careful, and you'll see that anytime there's a cool Hebrew Israelite, I'm able to have a totally chill conversation. I don't always have to do, because I'll make a funny video, but it's not about, the way someone looks or something. It's like the Hebrew hopscotch with Mario in there or something like that, right. But it doesn't have to be that. We can have a serious sit down. Like you look at, there's a guy named Divine Prospect. He calls himself Ron Shields. And we've had plenty of calm sit downs. Even some of the more radical guys, until they really kind of went off the rails even further, of a camp called Sakari, named after Jewish assassins, Guerrilla Hebrew, and some of his guys, I was able to have peaceful sit downs with them. Wow. I don't know if I would do that again because of sort of where they've been since then. But anybody, so there's nobody I like. It's rare for there to be somebody that I'll say I won't talk to them. There's a couple guys that I'll say, hey, I got to have certain conditions. Like there's a guy named Tazariak. I went on a show, totally burnt me with how he did it. Was totally dishonorable in what he did. So I said, I'll talk to you again, but I got a list of conditions to make sure you play fair. He doesn't really want to do it. He'll say he does. If you talk to him, he'd be like, oh, Vocab's scared. He just tried. No. I don't want you doing what you did again. So but pretty much talk to anybody about anything. The problem is, though, man, a lot of Hebrewites, they think that you have nothing to tell them, and so it's difficult to have a back and forth dialogue or conversation.
Well, when
a lot of them,
right,
you just need to shut up and be taught. A lot of them think that, no matter what you know or don't know, and so they say, "Come on." What they mean is, "I want to lecture you in public," and I'm not saying all of them are like that, but a large degree. That what they mean is, we need to have a sit down. I need to lecture you in public, and after that, that's not really what's going on here. You know what I mean? I need to ask some questions. You can ask me questions. Let's do this like men going back and forth with the dialogue. It's difficult to find, but it exists. Every now and then you can find it.
What do you think it is? Do you think it's the doctrine in particular? It has a strength and they're connecting it to it somehow ethnically, so it gives them this stronger, I have the one up because I have the genes, I have, or something there that. Yeah,
there's part of that. Whenever they bring that up, I'll say, hey, who was, in John 8, who is Jesus talking to there? He's talking to the religious leaders of this day, called them, children of the devil, basically, right? They were blood Israelites, right? I bring up that being a blood Israelite does not give you the right interpretation. You know what I mean? Who were the people during the prophet's day saying, no, here's the true prophecy. We're not going to be conquered by Babylon. Here's the prophet. They were Israelites. So this being an Israelite doesn't guarantee right interpretation, first of all, right? It's almost like the opposite of the genetic fallacy or something. But it's a couple of things. One is, and here maybe this is a tightrope to walk because I don't want to bash at church. I'm not a church basher, right? Some people, I find Christians sometimes find they can gain credibility with secular audiences by bashing the church. I'm not that guy, right? However, nonetheless, with that being said, a lot of these guys and gals do seem to have native experiences with their church background. And so in their mind, if you're a Christian stepping to them, you're coming from that same negative bubble. And a lot of them, they caricature, but they'll say things like, that's the place where no one knows the Bible. And it's all about the pastor and singing and show and scandal and money and yada, yada, yada. And so that's where you're coming from. You can't have anything to tell me. Like, I know where you came from. I know. What are you going to tell me? You're going to whitewash everything. You're going to do what your forefathers have done for hundreds of years and try to use this book to impress and enslave us. So there's actually Hebrews Light videos that say Vocab Malone, the slave catcher, because what they say is I'm trying to enslave people back in Christianity. So I'm a modern day slave catcher as an apologist, right? You know what I'm saying? So yeah, Robert Rowland says not all Hebrews believe in the New Testament. I caught that pretty quick when he said it was a rabbi that he wanted to point to, and that is true. So sometimes they're called Tanakh only Hebrew Israelites, but sometimes other Hebrew Israelites will call them non-messianic. They don't like being called non-messianic. A lot of times they prefer Tanakh only or something like that, and they're interesting. Dealing with those folks, I do not have as much experience with, not that I have none. I'm not saying that, is way more similar to dealing with the counter apologists like Jews for Judaism. Because if you know there's Jews for Jesus, the counter apologist movement that began largely in New York by a lot of not just Ashkenazi Sephardic folks was Jews for Judaism, and they have these counterpoints and arguments, and it's almost like reading Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trifle all over again. You look at dealing with the Tanakh only Hebrew Israelites is much more similar to dealing with like a Jewish apologist. And when I say Jewish apologist, I mean someone who holds to that's why I say Jews for Judaism. You know what I'm saying? The similarities are much greater.
I want to let the lions of the Lord know. No,
the loins of the Lord. The loins of the Lord, bro. That's
the loins. I thought it's my bad. And do the Hebrew Israelites even have an official unified interpretation of the Bible? No, it's not Orthodox. I suspect the ethnicity part could be Orthodox to some degree, but even you pointed out, because I asked, because there's important doctrines that are out there that are expressed by different groups, that ethnicity was a absolute requirement for salvation. So like where you talked about interpreting the Gentiles, there are people that I know that personally find no entrance for people who are non-Israelites ever in the totality of Scripture. That this is the way they approach it, and they go from the Hebrew Bible all the way into the New Testament. So when it gives a thumbs up view on Gentiles that has some message of salvific or soteriological approach, they cannot. It does not. They can't. It doesn't permit it. So therefore, it automatically means this Gentile ethne, which is nation, this person from nation or another nation, they're really an Israelite that is dispersed in those nations, but they themselves are biologically connected to Abraham in some sense, according to the view. And that I ask because they're kind of connected, but obviously this group I'm talking about mostly is largely a skeptical group that is actually not trying to lay claim of being in the narrative. They believe the narrative ended in the 1st century, which is preterism Israel only, which has nothing to do with Black Hebrew Israelites or anything like that. But I want you to check that out sometime. You like to debate and get in stuff. I'd like to have you look into that and tell me what you think of that at the end of the day. There are a lot of YouTube videos for that as well. I could reference the Jason DaCosta, All Prophecy Fulfilled. These are a couple different YouTube channels, but they're preterist, full preterist, and they're Israel only. So, and they say, look, we're not in the narrative. So like, I don't have an axe to grind. It's not like I'm trying to put myself into the story. They think that they're accurately interpreting the Bible, but you can't really comment on it unless you've really researched it. That's why I don't want you strawmanning them. But I want to ask you an honest question.
Well, I mean, the short version of that position for me is this: the book's not about us, and the book is closed.
That's practically what they say. Yeah. So here's my question. And we have some people who are obviously Black Hebrew Israelites in the comment section. Have you strawmanned them tonight?
Nah, because every time I was speaking in a specific One West position, I said it was a One West position. And, I certainly did not cover everything. We could, right. I could go into more detail about a number of things. I could mention a lot more specific. I could mention a lot more specific names. Like, for example, I didn't bring up Tanakh only Hebrew Israelites very much until a guy pops in and says, hey, not all of us believe in the New Testament. But even when I said that, I said most accept Jesus as Messiah. I see the Tanakh only guys wanting to kind of fight for their position and all that. And I get that. But they do not have, I don't think, the numbers or influence. And part of the reason is they kind of get subsumed in kind of like the Black Judaism rubric, whether that's fair or not, it kind of happens. And also what happens is the ones who are more prolific with YouTube videos get known, and the One Westers seem to do a better job of that, especially IUIC. IUIC's media department is absolutely insane, and they know how to work the system. and they do a very good job of it, and that's probably why they're the biggest One West camp. And the other thing is, these other guys aren't out on the street, so most people's real world experience is the One Westers, because they're the ones out in the street, and they are sort of the vanguard of the movement. And a lot of these Hebrew Israelites who are not One Westers, a lot of times they say, hey, look, we don't agree with their methods, they're a little rude, but at least they're preaching the proper identity doctrine. You know what I mean? Now, when it comes to, again, Tanakh only, it's a little bit different, because you get these Tanakh only Hebrew Israelites who are like, Jesus never existed. You guys are just Christians, you know. And the Hebrew Israelites who accept Christ as Messiah, well, that's redundant, but you know what I'm saying, Jesus Messiah, they take umbrage to that. We're not Christians, we're Hebrews. And so they actually sometimes debate themselves amongst themselves as well. And it's kind of like hearing
this gentleman here. Is he one of the guys that's probably Tanakh?
Yes, because of his name, and then if he's saying Paul wasn't real, that's different than Paul doesn't have authority over me. Obviously, it's a different claim. He's accepting some kind of mythicist position there, you know. Right. So Christ did not exist at all, and
neither did Paul.
Yeah, neither did Paul. You know, I mean, these
that's
guys.
A heavy claim, but yeah.
It is a heavy claim, and that's fine. I don't know what he's saying. Do we need to have a Paul mythicist on? Is that kind of what he's saying to balance out the show? I mean, I don't know if he has good evidence for that, but yeah.
Anyway, I'm fascinated, man. There's a whole world of this going on right now, and it's continuously probably splintering off into further sects of this type of movement. It intrigues me, but it's sad to me. It's sad.
Well, yeah. Even a non-Christian who cares about a harmonious society, I think, should they're gonna get mad, be concerned and care about the rise of Hebrew Israelism within the global scale, obviously mainly in Western contexts, especially America and cities. But it does nothing but harbor bitterness and resentment. A lot of these guys involve on a regular basis in sort of revenge fantasies. And you look at the real world implications. IUIC actually teaches, Derek, you get in here after a year, if your wife doesn't get with the doctrine, then you need to divorce her. That's a real world implication for what happens. You know what I mean? You get in this thing, all of a sudden you're divorcing your wife. Or if she's not an Israelite, you divorce her right away, because it doesn't matter if she accepts the doctrine or not. You know what I mean? She's of the wrong nation. That's a serious thing. A lot of these groups of the One West variety teach polygyny, which is polygamy of a sort, which means a man can have more than one wife, and in fact is kind of encouraged to do so. A lot of these guys like ISUPK will teach that polygyny is actually a solution for the black community to rebuild the family. You know what I'm saying? So you get claims like that, right? It looks like Derek has been knocked off. I don't know if I'm going to get knocked off too, but I see that Derek has been knocked off. Hopefully he can come back in. We'll see what's going on. But let me look here at the comment section, perhaps. John Pete says, Vocab Malone only talks about One West. He's scared of the end of the world ministries, Dante Fortson, Watchman reports, etc. John Pete, I am not scared of any of those groups. In fact, I did a video today. There was a flashback video on Dante Fortson and how he made claims about the 400-year prophecy that he held to. I didn't even talk about that in today's show. But as you very well know, John Pete, a lot of the people that you just mentioned claimed that in 2019, the captivity was going to end. Now, John Pete, did the captivity end in 2019? You know the answer is no. And so what happened is, John Pete, the End of the World Ministries, who you said I'm scared of, which I'm not scared of. I would debate him in a heartbeat. Same thing with Dante Fortson. But Dante Fortson is releasing a video today called How to Sue Vocab Malone. So he's not trying to debate me. He wants to sue me. The video is literally called How to Sue Vocab Malone. So John Pete, let me ask you this. You said I'm scared of Dante Fortson. Who's scared of who? I'm not making a video saying how to sue Dante. Why would he want to sue me? He wants to shut me up. He wants to have me be quiet. So who's scared of who? Who's out here threatening to run to the white man and talk about let's sue somebody? It's your guy. So who's scared of who? But just to show you, I'm going to also drop a video tomorrow. The next day, about the end of the world ministries and how they also claimed that 2019 was the end. And then in his video, he said, well, let's recalibrate. And he said, actually, it's August 2020. And guess what? It's supposed to be tomorrow. So when the prophecy doesn't come true, the captivity's not ended, the curses have not ended. When that happens tomorrow, and Teo that you brought up, that's the end of the world ministries, fails, what are you still gonna hype him up and say he's a way to go? Because I would love to talk to him about it. Because what they've done is the last thing I'll say, because I see Derek is back. I'm sorry about that. I ain't trying to bogart nobody's show. But John Pete, since you're gonna say I'm scared, let me ask you this about Teo. If you go back and study him and Dante prior to 2019 of August, when it actually happened, their false prophecy was not fulfilled. They would say things like this: the curses are going to end, or the captivity's over. And they even promoted the Pastor Omar Thabew video that said that exact thing. And the video on my channel discusses that today. 14-minute video, watch it. Now, what they have done since then is went through the news cycle and looked for bad news. COVID-19, earthquakes, tornadoes, locusts in Africa, all this kind of stuff, and said, look, this is evidence that the prophecy is fulfilled. They have changed the nature of their false prophecy. It went from our captivity is going to end, our curses are going to cease, to the white man is going to be judged with really bad stuff. This is the easiest prophecy to fulfill ever, because all you got to do then is go through the news, find bad news, and say, look, it's judgment upon America or something like that. But prior to the non-fulfillment of August 2019, they were not saying it's going to be a bunch of judgments on the white man. They were saying it's going to be the end of our captivity. They have changed the name of the game. They've changed the prophecy. And now what they're engaging is ad hoc fulfillment. So John Pete, I am not afraid of them. They are afraid of me because they're trying to sue me instead of talking to me. That's all I got to say about that, John Pete.
Okay, Robert Rowland, I will look into Rabbi Akwidi Amma, I believe I pronounced that correct, and check out some of his videos. Love to see him on your show to give another perspective with a real Hebrew. Hopefully he's a gentleman. I'll reach out. Maybe we'll have a phone conversation prior to ever interviewing. I don't stick strictly to this topic. This is obviously a very rare topic on my channel. It's never been presented on this channel. And thank you for keeping on going. I thought I lost you guys. My internet went... I kind of feel like someone's hexing me right now. I don't know. I'm just kidding. But
all are Hebrew Israelites who engage in curses in Hebrew, by the way.
Interesting.
GMS specifically. GMS curses people.
I have never, man, that's wild, bro. Hey, this guy right here, he doesn't agree with the majority of the camps, but Christ wasn't real as a true Hebrew Israelite. We wouldn't follow him. And I said Paul wasn't real because his teachings was wrong. So he's in the camp that you were talking about that disagrees with Paul being an actual teacher, so to speak, in line with the New Testament.
You know your doctrine's wrong when you got to say, this part of the Bible is not valid, because what you're saying is the Bible does not agree with us. That's just an admitting of that, and that's fine. It's good to admit that, because you're in essence saying, hey, because you got to imagine they are literally taking the Thomas Jefferson scissors and cutting out 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. That's what
they're holding the other books, but not. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so some of these people are disagreeing with the whole New Testament. Some of them are cutting out some. I hope there was some drama in here while I was gone. I mean, look, you got to keep things spiced up in here, Jerry Springer and stuff. So I'm going to questions. So let's go to questions, because we're hour and 10 minutes into this now. Thank you once again for joining me. Don't forget to go down in the description, subscribe to his channel. If you got problems, you disagree, go on his channel. Let him know, man. He encourages the comments, and I'm sure you like getting people's reactions there.
I love everybody, but at the same time, bring the smoke.
Bring the smoke. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Someone said, Lisa J said, I saw a video. I'm sorry, Liza. I apologize. I saw a video today. Dante Fortson made defamatory statements about Vocab and clearly lied in this video while making a video about suing for defamation. Shma. Interesting.
Yeah, what it is he wants other Hebrew Israelites to sue me for defamation, but he doesn't want to do it himself. So his video is literally called How to Sue Vocab.
Interesting. Dude, this is an interesting. I don't know how you got caught up in this. So you were walking down the street growing up and this stuff was going on around you? That's what made you get into this? Or
I was in college the first time that I. But yes, that's the short version. There's a longer version, but that is short version. Again, I'm a city boy all the way. I don't know how to fish. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying I'm a very city boy. I'm in the city. I'm walking the city blocks. I'm running into Hebrew Israelites. You know what I'm saying?
okay, and that's how it sparked your interest to tackle these topics. Or
My initial reaction was, hey, I've got to focus on Salafi Islam. And so let me help people who were asking me questions about this, whatever. Let me give them apologetic resources. What I found out there is there at that time there were no apologetic resources. So I was kind of like, oh, whoa. I was like, well, I don't know if I'm the guy for the job, but I'll do it in the meantime and see what happens. And it's just taken off since there, because that quest began in earnest at this point about almost 5 years ago.
how many people are like you that are apologists or people who go back at the Hebrew Israelitism?
When I first came in, there was an underground scene that you could, count with both hands. Maybe you have to take off one shoe. Now, there's so many. Yeah, from G-Con and Faithful to God, and you got a Jordan Ortiz and Miss Titus 2 and Nefertiti, and I mean, this is an amazing list of amazing people. Adam Coleman. Some don't do it full time, but now they're aware enough to do it sometimes. Others specialize in it. It's a great thing to see. Sister Cherry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. We got you can debate Hebrew Israelites is easy. Just expose to Deuteronomy 28. John Pete says, what about Watchmen reports? I heard they invited you to contact them and have a discussion.
I don't know if they did. I'll put it this way. I don't remember ever seeing anything from them. If they did, I've forgotten about it, which happens a lot with me. So if they have directly contacted me and whatever, maybe they could do it, because I really don't know. I know more about Dante and the Underworld Ministries than I do Watchmen reports. But I've seen their stuff, et cetera. And I'd be willing to. I mean, I did watch the videos where they definitely talk smack about me for a whole show or so, but I don't remember them contacting me. But I would talk to them. Maybe you could help set that up. If you're down, then I'm down.
Yeah, I don't mind a debate. Let's see. We'll get a poll going and get people's thoughts on this. This is a skeptic channel, but it doesn't matter, man. You can tell I'm friendly. It doesn't matter, where you stand. Ultimately, I think these are interesting disputes that take place. And so Dynamic says, and I think this is a question to you technically. Like, do you think the present day people in Israel are true Israelites, or do you think they mixed in somewhere and
are the people in present day Israel Israelites? All right. So a few things about that. Palestinians live in Israel. Clearly, they wouldn't even identify as Israelites. So we're remembering that, I assume. But what they're trying to say is, are folks who claim to be Israelites, are they descendants of the biblical Israelites? Mm-hmm. The thing is, most Hebrewites don't like a long form answer that's kind of complicated. But it's kind of a complex discussion, because there's not only my theological perspective, there's also genealogical, cultural, historical issues that make it a sophisticated, complex conversation. Once I do that, he's waffling and he's evading no, we're trying to answer the question seriously. The short version is some of them. But see, what is an Israelite, and it doesn't matter under a new covenant understanding, is another question. And so here's what it is. Are the people in Israel today who claim to be Israelites, are they like 100% direct descendants from the Israelites who came out of Egypt with Moses? Certainly not. No way. Notice I said 100%. How long ago was that? Now, it partially depends on when you date the Exodus. I imagine there's people watching who think that's a fairy tale too, whatever. Well, looking at that, Judaism allows conversion. The problem is some Hebrewites don't accept that reality. Since Judaism does allow conversion, then you have a situation in which people who would not ethnically be the seed of Abraham are now included into the community. So because of that, you have that. there's questions about intermarriage in Israel's history, but regardless of what you think, there's times where Israelites did intermarry and produce children. These are facts that are attested in the Bible as well as history. Mm-hmm. And so multiple sources that show us this. This means you're not going to have this clear, undiluted line or something like that. Plus, you have interesting historical movements like when in between the period of the Old and New Testaments, this is using colloquial language, you have the days of the Maccabees and whatnot. They went into the Transjordan area, and there are people there who were of questionable ancestry when it came to Judaism. But this is one of the rare times in the history of Israel that there were sort of basically forcible conversions happening. And so a lot of people who lived in Idumea, as it was called, these are the descendants of Esau, Edomites, and the Edom kingdom, but in Greek it's Idumea, converted in. And Herod's a perfect example. He's called the king of Jews, but he himself is of Idumea. His own lineage, like all those of Idumea in the first century, was questionable. Well, are they really Israelites, or are they just these descendants of these forced converts? What's going on? Well, you have that happen. And so you have that going down. You have all these factors, plus you have Israelites getting conquered themselves, then they get spread out, then they come back, but they don't come back. It's not like, there was no intermarriage and this and that a lot of times in the meantime. And I think there's good evidence for this, meaning when you look at different Jewish communities around the world, they end up looking 9 times out of 10 like their cultural geographical neighbors. So the Ashkenazi, which makes up for maybe about half of modern day Jewry by most stats that I've seen, the Ashkenazi look like Eastern Europeans as far as sort of visual phenotype expression. However, they have these genetic markers that match up with people who claim to be Sephardic. So people in those communities who are not identical, and also Jews in Iraq, Jews in Yemen. And one of the most surprising one of all for a lot of people, including the scholar who really done a lot of work on this, Tudor Parfit, the Limba. They look like their neighbors, which the Limba dwell in Zimbabwe and South Africa. So you would say, oh, African Limba. They had this oral history that they came from a land in the Middle East in essence. They do the actual genetic analysis, and it turns out they have these genetic markers that are distinctive to Ashkenazi communities. They have those same distinctive markers. So it's a shocking thing to Tudor Parfit and the larger world who studied Jewry to find that there was an oral history that was matched by genetic evidence. And here's what's really interesting about the Limba. The males in the priestly clan had a higher amount of these things. If I'm not mistaken, I believe even the Cohen modal type, as well as the J haplogroup. These are common things. So here's what's so wild. You have people who claim to be Jewish communities in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Russia, and they have things in their DNA that are distinctive to Jewish communities that they both possess. Very fascinating phenomena occurring. Now you had the Igbo, and I think our guy's rabbi, I saw him mentioning about the Igbo, so I think he capes for them, which means says that, hey, these are Israelites. The Igbo started claiming this relatively recently as well. These are ethnic group mainly in Nigeria. Well, there's a Christian ministry that took them at their word, those who claimed to be of Israelite ancestry, and they were working with them. It's a group called Jewish Voice. It's a kind of messianic Christian group that focuses on bringing the gospel to Jewish communities and stuff like that. They were working with the Igbo, but then they did the DNA testing. And remember, the Jewish Voice people wanted the Igbo because there was some positive reception to the gospel. They wanted them to be descendants of Israelites. Well, all the information came back. They were not descendants. There was no Semitic DNA present. There's a big kerfuffle because the Jewish Voice people pulled out of doing the missions work, which including some material support for the Igbo communities they were working with. So there's a big kerfuffle, even spilled over into some secular Jewish media, kind of like, look at this foul up. And then kind of Jewish Voice ended up working with the Limba instead, different part of the African continent. So people cape for the Igbo, but it's kind of a modern phenomenon, to be honest. Now, they'll say that's not the case. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I know what they're going to say, but look at it. It's true that it is a modern phenomenon. And so this gets into people on the African continent, are there Israelites there? There are some Hebrew Israelites who basically say all of Africa is basically filled with Israelites. Others are very anti-African, like the ISUPK. They will not allow Africans at their barbecues. I kid you not. There's a video of it on Sodnet TV. I've put the video in there. Tazariak meets a young African boy and will not let him in the barbecue because he says this is an African and we can't have Africans at the barbecue. So there's a strong anti-African sentiment among the One West camps. But let's see what he says. What do we got here? I don't even know what that means. He's probably trying to. I wonder if he's trying to sneak E1.
Well, he says this here.
In there.
He says this right here. Just so you know, thank you for the $5 donation. I really do appreciate that. That all helps. I really do appreciate it.
Maybe it sounds like he's trying to do the.
He says one more thing up here. One more thing. What about the history from Josephus that speaks on the Jews sent into slavery in the mines of Nubia and Sudan? Do you have an opinion on that?
So Josephus does talk about Israelites going into captivity and going in different places, right? But what I noticed with a lot of Hebrew Israelites who want to get into this, a lot of times their source is a book called From Babylon to Timbuktu by Ralph Windsor. A lot of times what they do is they haven't really looked at some of the context of these things themselves, and they act as if the records of these things is kind of like this. And then the Jews were kicked out of the land and they all went into Africa. But the accounts are everybody's going everywhere, basically. So they'll focus on the Jews who did go into Africa, because that is true. There's evidence, for example, the port outside of Alexandria, the Jewish slaves arriving in ships there. There's different varieties of evidence of seeing that. So this is a reality. No one should deny the diaspora. No one should deny that Jewish communities exist in Africa, including West Africa. That, however, is different than saying said Jewish communities intermingled with local populations to become phenotypically indiscernible and losing their own distinctive Jewish identity, because that is the extension of the Hebrew Israelite claim. And that's why people who came over on the transatlantic slave trade didn't really know who they were. So now they're waking up, and devils like Vocab are trying to stop the wake up. That's what they said. I'm not saying this guy's saying all that, but that's so
you've heard this.
Well, this is common. This is like, I'm literally repeating things like, so there, it's true enough about Jews going into Africa, but they also went here, and you have a very real reality of them staying, for the large part, from what we can discern. Remember, history is not always exactly clear about what happened, especially when you talk about population shifts and demographic movements. You have very interesting things, and sometimes there's like centuries where you lose track of written records. There's all kinds of things that happen where it's like, what exactly happened here? You know, keeping track of everybody in these global shifts is quite a job, right? Well, you look at that and you see these Jewish communities in West Africa, for example, it seems by and large they stayed to themselves, which is kind of standard behavior, which is why sometimes Jews get in trouble in Europe, for example. You know what I'm saying? Why aren't they getting sick? We're getting sick. Well, you know, this kind of stuff, right? So you have this very real reality. It seems like they, in essence, stayed by themselves, always realized and knew they were Jews, and basically a lot of them left. A lot of them have got those Jewish communities are sort of a product of the past. So to try to claim like identification with, say, the Igbo or the Ethiopian, like it's this one-to-one correlation, this leftover remnant, is highly problematic. Now, the Ethiopians who claim Jewish ancestry, that is a way more complex issue, because there are some clear Semitic traces. For example, the language is Semitic. And so it's a fascinating study. And Israel itself is, under the law of return, said, hey, if you claim, come on. And so now if you look at modern day Israel, there's Ethiopians very present. And that's why when people say, what about the Israelites? It's not a bunch of people looking like Jerry Seinfeld and Woody Allen running around there. Certainly, they're more prominent in the society. There are some, it seems, elements of racism and different things like that there. However, you have a relatively much more diverse society than I think a lot of people suspect when it comes to Israel. Look at the IDF especially. You really see the diversity, because there you really see kind of all classes, not sort of just the elite. And you look at the IDF, incredibly diverse. You just see it. And it's clear there's people of Ethiopian ancestry and all kinds of other things. And last thing I'll say about that, and this is why this is a fascinating, complex subject. In the 60s, a group of Hebrew Israelites left the south side of Chicago, went to Liberia, then went to Israel, and now they have a compound or a community in Dimona, Israel, called Village of Peace is what they call it. And there's about 5,000 of them, and now they've blended into larger Israelite society. However, it seems almost certain that they are simply not actually Semitic in any way, but they live in Israel claiming to be Semitic, and there they are, and there's probably 5,000 of them. Amari Stoudemire, who's a former NBA player, works a lot with this community, produced a video on it called Village of Peace. So they're in Israel, and Israel has even granted them to build, now they're in the IDF. But if you look at their history, they came from the south side of Chicago. They were Black Americans who came over. And so they're in Israel as well. And now they're blended into the society. So it's not just only Russian Jews and Ukrainian Jews, right? You have people who have left Iraq. You have people who left Yemen. You have a lot who have left Iran. They've left these places that they've become less hospitable to Jews. A lot of them have went into Israel, and they look like all kinds of things, usually the cultural environments they came out of. But now they're starting to intermarry in all this, and some people say it's a reconstituting Israel. Really, it's just probably, as far as genetic levels, it's just going to be more confusing, mixing, matching. But you always have legitimate Semitic DNA present at some degree or another based on every test that I've seen.
Interesting. Well, thank you, brother. Hey, look, you're a fascinating character, man. I got to say it. And this was a very interesting topic. I rarely discuss this, but if it weren't for the recent articles that I had read on Dr. Jason Staples, who actually makes an argument on Genesis or Revelation. Here I am jumping in two books that I'm not even trying to talk about. Romans 9 through 11, where he talks about a fresh look at the Gentiles. He makes the case that the fullness of the Gentiles and that all Israel shall be saved is actually a reference to fulfilling the lost tribes of Israel concept by Paul in the New Testament, which was like radical, like who thinks that? There's like 4 major views. And I know that Dr. Heiser comments on this view as well. So I came across your video. A buddy of mine was like, you got to check this guy out. And I said, let me get him on for sure to talk about this. And I didn't know the world of this kind of topic with Black Hebrew Israelites was this complex and this full of stuff. Maybe we can set up a debate at some time where I don't know if there's a topic we can go into the ethnic side biblically, arguing where you can make a case where you think it's broadening in the New Testament, at least to opening up to more than just biological descendants of Abraham. I don't know if that's a topic you debate or not.
Maybe, you know what? Maybe one of these, I don't know, maybe one of the Israel only guys. Because check this out. When it comes to debating Hebrew Israelites on the topic of, quote, can Gentiles be saved?
Right.
I don't like it. Here's why. In their mind, it's granting their number one, and I'm just going to be frank here, their number one self-delusion, which is, I'm an Israelite. They think the debate is Vocab is trying to work his way into salvation and people who are like him. That's not what's happening. I don't think the person I'm debating when they're a Hebrew Israelite is Hebrew or an Israelite. So I'm not granting that the discussion is about whether I get salvation and they already get it. But so I don't like those debates because I think it grants a key assumption for them, and they view the argument as an Israelite versus a Gentile, and that's feeding into their delusion, to be frank with you.
What if I got an idea, just to throw this out there. I respect that. I'm not here to I don't like stirring up the pot.
No, they want to debate that all the time, but I'm not. I told when a Hebrew Israelite approaches me with that, I say, no, let's do this. Let's do a debate where you have to prove that you are an Israelite. Not Black people are Israelites, not Hispanics. You are an Israelite.
Well,
that's challenging their number one assumption about their whole religion.
Bring your DNA paperwork and make sure that
whatever evidence they want to use, whatever the evidence they want to use, they can use. I want them to prove they sitting in the chair on the microphone, they are an Israelite because they cannot do it. They cannot do it. It becomes an insane speculative journey into the realm of maybes.
Okay, then let me ask you this. If I can set up a discussion, not a debate. I mean, I got some friendly friends that are Israel only. They don't believe anyone after 70 AD has a stake in this game.
Right.
They have a view that, listen, this was for Israel only. And when they say all Israel, they mean Judah and Israel, north and south. The new covenant was made for these two houses only. And they'll argue saying, look, I'm not putting myself into the narrative. I don't believe that I am an Israelite. This is the way they'll approach it. But they'll try to argue that salvation was only for the
What do your friends, Derek, I'm sorry, what do your friends think salvation, what it means? What is it?
What do they... Well, I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but I suspect they have different views, particularly because I've been trying to dig this out. But I know that usually in the Old Testament, salvation to them, or their perception, is saving from their enemies, so to speak. This kind of
that's what's so fascinating about it. So they think these are promises given to those who are ethnic Israelites. It means they'll be saved from their enemies.
Right. And
do they think these promises have been fulfilled or are going to be fulfilled in the future?
They believe it ended in 70. So yeah, they believe everything found its fulfillment, even if it was spiritualized, or even if they take a fictional approach on the New Testament. And they say, listen, according to the narrative, according to the story, everything wrapped up. So whatever you want to say and however it happened, whether it literally happened or not, the narrative ended at 70. And therefore you're trying to put yourself into the narrative when the end happened at the temple's destruction, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. And they'll go and say the synoptic apocalypse is the same apocalypse that John is talking about. And it's the same parousia, or if you will, ending of the Pauline corpus. So, but they have a harmonizing tool where they try to say, pretty much is full preterism combined with what's called Israel only. And here you have the theory. But I wanted to know if you'd be interested in having a discussion. I know you're a debater, but like a discussion, even just to hear them out. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I could always find out more and ask them some questions. For example, what exactly is salvation under this rubric? You know what I mean? Because if you're saying it's salvation from your enemies, yet they're including New Testament data, there seems to be a disconnect right away to me. So I'd like to discuss that, and maybe some other things. So let me know. Let's stay in conversation about it. Yes, sir.
Last comment. We got it on the screen.
Dana Marnick Reynolds. What is Dana Marnick Reynolds going to do? What is this shade? Not poor Israelites. What is it?
Not sure. Thank you for the donation again. That I can say. I'm not sure, but I suspect this is to you. Do you have a response for that?
Of which thing? I mean, I see Dana. I see she's an anthropologist. Chicago, whatever. But it's just I guess what do they want me to see or whatever?
I guess they're stating that she has poor scholarship in the field of ethnic issues. I suspect. I don't know.
I'm down to do these things, but I believe in scholarship and care about that. Hopefully people can tell by this conversation, but I'm also, there's a certain level of populism that I'm concerned with. And what I mean by that is I'll talk to any of these people with obscure views or whatever, but sometimes I get these conversations and they want me to talk to a bunch of people who aren't moving the needle.
Okay.
Now, the one person brought up Dante Fortson, he certainly has a following, right? But of course he wants to sue me, not talk to me. But like some of these people, they're like, as far as what's happening in Hebrew Islamism in the cities and in America, it's not exactly relevant. Doesn't mean I won't talk to them, because there's always something to learn, and that's all good. I'm open to suggestion. But a lot of times people say talk to this person, they mean they want me to find them, call them. Hey, help me. If you really think we need to talk, help set it up. Whoever I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. Just like, maybe you can help set it up. Like, I'm not going to track down your recommend, help me set it up and all that. And maybe we could do it.
And try and be cordial. I understand that there's beliefs in this and stuff. So I've been there, trust me. And, but I really respect you. I thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being patient too. I mean, I see a lot of people who don't like you or may not agree with you, and that's okay. We're going to disagree on things. I mean, me and you, if we really dug into what I think and what you think, we would disagree, and that's okay. But like, hey, you're on the channel, man. You're on a skeptic channel, bro, right now, like we're human beings. And I really do appreciate you coming on and joining me and giving me the chance. I'm sure you saw some of these videos I've had on previously and went, oh my gosh, what the hell am I getting myself into? What kind of show is this? You know what I mean? But thank you for joining me, Vocab. And thank you everybody who's gave super chats. I really appreciate that. That helps me out right now. And thank you, man. You got anything you'd like to say to everyone before we get off here?
Well, quick, Osiris77 said, what is it with the UFOs and their signs? The answer to that is one Westers believe that black angels, meaning chariots, which actually look like flying saucers, are going to be part of the end times destruction that'll be wreaked upon America. And so the UFOs on the sign to them are visual reminders of their coming liberation and coming judgment of the United States? That's the answer to that question.
I learned from everybody. I learned a lot from you today, you know, and I don't have to agree on everything. And I learned from all of you guys. So thank you. And thank you, Myth Vision podcast fans. I see a lot of your fans that have come in here. People said, thank you for having you on the show. Nate, 2D2, thank you. Thanks a lot, brother. Next time, maybe we can touch on some other specifics. If you think of anything in particular, I would like to have you come back. I wouldn't mind hosting a debate. If you come across something and you're interested and you need a host, hey, I got the power to mute people. So, you know, we can keep this thing in control, and I am neutral. It's not like I favor you or favor them. At the end of the day, I'll have a disagreements with both of you guys and probably have a lot in common in some areas. So I really do appreciate you, man. And thanks for joining me here at Myth Vision. And